and welcome back to Becoming the Influential Me, the podcast. I'm Michelle Chikanda, and today I want to dive right in. Have you ever felt so fearful of failing that you ultimately decide to do nothing? I asked this question because I've been looking back at my own career and at my own life, and I've realized that fear plays a big part in how I showed up. And how many times I spoke up, how many times I didn't, how much of a vision I had for my own career, and so many other things. If I was fearless in my career, I'm so confident that I would have done so much more, been so much more, and showed up even bigger and better than I already am. And it takes a little bit of courage, to be honest, to say that I'm already somewhere, because I fear already that people might think, oh, she thinks she's insert derogatory terms of choice. I am obsessed with the concept of fear, and I decided what better way to deal with my fear than to lean into it, right? I'm going to put it out there. I am deathly afraid of failing. It is one of those things that scares me. What if I become nothing? What if people laugh at me? What if, whatever my endeavors are, do not succeed? What if I do not become a successful person? What if I do not become a successful human being, have a family, etc.? Insert all of those things. So I've been reading up on this subject, and one thing that I realized, or one thing that I was told in one of the books that I read, was that whatever fear you feel, somebody has felt that fear before. Now that thought made me think, Michelle, you might be missing a trick here. So I decided to start reading about some of the most prolific thinkers, in my view, and prolific people that I really admire, and to try and understand what their fears were and how they overcame them, because they did to overcome them. And I've come to this place and I've realized there is so much information on this. One thing I value about successful people is a lot of them are not afraid to discuss and to talk about their failures and their fears and how they overcame them. It's just that sometimes we don't go looking for the information, so we don't necessarily see it. So, to that end, I have decided that I'm going to do a 5-part series on women who failed to let their failures define them. Because as I was reading about a lot of these prolific women, I realized they have one thing in common. They all failed. And once they failed, they figured out a way to deal with it and rise, right? And then not only did they rise, some of them rose to the highest heights. And to kick us off on this 5-part series, I would like to talk about somebody I deeply admire, and that is Arianna Grande. Oh dear, Arianna Huffington. I do admire Ariana Grande as well, but yeah, this is about Arianna Huffington. Okay. Arianna Huffington is somebody that has written so many books, and when I think of her, the very last thing, and I mean the very last thing I think about is fear of failure. I sort of see her as somebody who's fearless, somebody who has conquered on so many different levels and has reached a very respectable measure of success. But one of the things that she has been very deliberate about is documenting how many times she has failed. And I admire and respect her for that. So this was a little bit of an education for me, and I wanted to share some of the things that I learned from her, which will hopefully make you feel better about how you can empower yourself to move forward. So let us dive right in. A key overarching theme that I loved from Arianna is that fearlessness is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more natural it becomes to not let your fears run you. Now, I've come across so many people, male, female, old, young, who are run by their fears. Their fears stop them from becoming the most influential version of themselves, the very best version of themselves, because they're fearful of rejection, of failing, of success sometimes. And the key thing is, you've got to ask yourself the question, am I running my fears, or are my fears running me? Take that in for a minute. Okay, so what Arianna says, which I absolutely love, she talks about fearlessness is not the absence of fear, but it is the mastery of it. And I loved this because it's like Fear is never going to go away, just like self-doubt is never going to go away. But it's just our ability to master our own emotions. And I'm going to come back to a concept that she shares that I absolutely love about how she mastered her emotions and how she manages to, keep moving forward despite all the things that she has faced in her life. So, let us talk about Arianna Huffington's failures, right? So, in her 20s, and I absolutely love this woman had 36 book rejections. She wrote a book and publishers declined to publish it 36 times. Now, when she was talking about this experience, she talks about how at points she felt like, maybe she should give up. And she said most people after 18, if you even get that far, I know I might not have, in fact, I'm pretty certain I wouldn't have, would have gone off and got a job, right? And made some money rather than, getting to the point where you have dwindling savings and you have to take out a loan, which is what she did. Most of us would just say, give up on the pipe dream and keep moving. But she was rejected 36 times. And after that, she had to go to the bank because she'd run out of money and ask for a loan. And she says she was so gutsy about asking for her loan. She had nothing behind her. But she went in and she asked for that loan and she got it. And that allowed her to hold out a little bit more until she eventually got her book published. And it wasn't even that successful. But how she talks about that is she said it didn't achieve any commercial success, but she said it was a seed that she planted that sprouted much later when she was in her 40s. What a beautiful way of looking at a scenario. So how many times have you experienced one setback, two setbacks, and then you're like, I'm not doing that anymore? I know I've certainly done that many times in my life. But I hope that for those of you in your 20s, I'm unfortunately no longer a part of that club, don't let your fears cause you to settle. I know there were certain things that I thought, a lot of dreams that I dreamt that I didn't go after because maybe I put the feelers out and it didn't work out. Or I got something mediocre and I decided that was safer and took that instead. I took heart from her conviction that whenever you feel something is your passion and it was what you were born to do, you are definitely going to face tests, trials, challenges, tears, the works. And that is almost, from the way she describes it and the way I understand it, it's almost a sign that you're on the right track, which is crazy. But I found that phenomenal for somebody in her 20s to have that level of conviction. And I implore all of us to take that as a lesson. Just believe in yourself and believe in what you're capable of and allow yourself to show up as the best version of yourself. And when the trials come, which they will, just go with it, roll with it and see where it takes you, which is all she was saying. She didn't know that it was going to be successful or not, and it wasn't, but she went with it. Okay. What else happened to this phenomenal woman? Well, I was heartbroken by this because I could definitely relate to this. When she was 30, now talking into her 30s, I'm going for a failure each decade. Some decades have more than one that I've documented. I'm sure she experienced much more than that. But when she was in her 30s, Ariana Grande, I keep calling her Ariana Grande. This is crazy. Arianna Huffington decided to end a relationship. She was in a relationship with somebody she says was the love of her life, was a mentor, was a prolific thinker, was somebody who she loved with everything. And at 30 years old, she left that relationship because he didn't want children. She knew she wanted children. And she talks about the irrational versus the rational thought process that she went through when she came to the decision to leave. And she said it's one of the hardest things that she did. And she talks about, 40 years later or however long it's been since then, she still feels it when she thinks about how hurt and how much strength it took to move on from that relationship because it wasn't right for her. But on the irrational side, she says she personalized the failures of that relationship. And she said, if I was more X, Y, and Z, then he would want children. And she said rationally she knew it was to do with him, but personally she took it on board as her own failures. And again, kudos to her, because a lot of us stay in relationships much longer than we need to because we're fearful of being on our own. And again, I am in awe of her courage, because that's what it was. Courage to step out and say, you know what, if I move away from this relationship, and in my experience, I said, if I die single, which was my greatest fear, then that's okay. So I commend her courage, but it doesn't stop there. When she did eventually meet somebody at 36, she was married. I don't know if she was married at that point, but I think she was. She was married, and she went through a miscarriage. And of course, what did she do? She said, another failure of mine. I have failed. My body has failed. Will I ever be able to have children again? How will I get over this? And in due course, she did have another baby, and the other baby was fine, and she went on to have 2 girls. But she definitely experienced that miscarriage as a failure on her part. And she had so many fears around children. And she talks about when she was pregnant, she was so fearful that her baby wouldn't make it because the other one, had died. And what I learned from that is, she is so vulnerable to talk about those moments so openly. And she's so right. This is not an experience I have had, but she addresses the fact that when sometimes things go wrong in our lives as women, we stop thinking rationally, and we become irrational, and we internalize those things and make them our fault, whether it's a relationship or a lost baby, which ultimately are not things that are completely one's fault, right? Especially the baby. It happens, and it was out of her control. And if she could have summoned the will to make her baby live, of course she would have. But still, even though it was irrational, she internalized it. Again, this is something I don't have any experience of. But I think we can all learn from Arianna that sometimes things happen, and it's up to us how we decide to move on and how we decide to show up. In both instances, with the relationship and with the child, she chose to try again. And with the baby, it was successful. And with the relationship, it wasn't, which leads me to the failure of her 40s, right? In her 40s, Arianna Huffington went through a divorce. And that must be, one of the things that she said when she's talking about this divorce is she said, I married late and I married for life. So like all of us with the fairy tale scenarios in our minds, we believe that when you do get married, the relationship has to work. And she went through the failure of her relationship not working. Not only that, she had 2 children. One child who seemingly got on with it, and another child who was so desperate for her parents to get back together that she would, be like, oh, when are you going for dinner with daddy, or whatever it is. But she was so desperate. And Arianna talks about how hard that was. But she knew that the best thing she could do for her children is provide them with an environment where they are loved by both parents, and both parents love each other, albeit not together. Again, courage, right? The courage to make a bold decision like that, despite the fairy tale wants and needs, and, the feeling of being loved and wanting to belong and all of those other things. She made the courageous decision to just say, so be it. This will be what is best in the long term for everybody involved. And she has documented how happy they all are as a family, albeit her and her ex-husband, have their own lives. And again, I'm inspired by that, because a lot of people would use that as an excuse for why they cannot be where they want to be, because A, they stay in an unhappy marriage, or B, they leave, and then the experience of it all is so crippling that we fail to move forward in our lives. Again, something I have no experience of, but I'm learning, about some of the things that may come and how I can approach those things and how I can be courageous. And when I look at Arianna Huffington's life, I'm thinking, in spite of all this, a big failure in her 20s, 2 big quote-unquote failures in her 30s, a failure in her 40s, these are all life-changing events. And yet still, the woman ascended to where she is now. So I take heart in what she's been able to achieve, despite all the setbacks, should we call them? Okay, now let's talk about her 50s. This one I absolutely loved and I found really intriguing. She set up HuffPost when she was in her 50s. And what happened? Of course, she was told, oh, you're just having a midlife crisis as a woman. And this is a young man's game because it was the dot-com times. And, this was the entrepreneurial Silicon Valley, Harvard grad time to create things. And it was a man's world. And people were like, what is this 50-something-year-old woman doing here? And Arianna said she did not let that criticism and that negativity slow her down. And she just kept moving on. What else happened in her 50s that was really interesting? She ran for governor of California. She ran against Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we know that Arnold Schwarzenegger won the governorship. Whew. Now, this woman did not stop. She's written so many books. She had, acquired status in the media world by setting up this Huffington Post, this empire, that's the word I'm looking for. And yet she still felt like she had more in her. So she put herself out there, and she talks about the challenges of that, how she was spoken to as a woman trying to assert herself, and as a woman trying to fight for what she believed was right. She said she was treated very differently to men, and ultimately she didn't succeed. But what I love about that is she documented everything that she experienced so that she could share and so that it could be used by those that came after her. Now, let me ask you a question. How often do you use your failures either to learn from them or to teach others? I highly value the lessons that we get from our failures. And I actually wish that my parents or, my teachers or my mentors spoke more about their failures and how they navigated the emotional challenges. Why is this important? Well, it's important because as I've navigated my own career, as I've made big, bold steps that absolutely terrified me, I just wish somebody had almost told me that, the intellectual stuff, Michelle, you're going to get. Learning technology, learning about people, learning, all of the different challenges you face, you're going to understand that. But the greatest gift will be mastering your own emotions, because that's the part that is super challenging. Understanding that whether you're tired, happy or unhappy, well or unwell, that your emotions will dictate how far you get, and managing them and sometimes overriding them, right? Feeling negative, despondent, hopeless, whatever, and then just saying, I'm going to do it anyways. That mastery is where the genius is. And I wish that, and for me, I know this as a woman, or maybe as a person as well, overcoming emotions is by far the most challenging thing I've ever had to do, and I'm still doing in my career. Okay, and so going back to Arianna, she goes for this big job in the public eye. And she is, she talks about her thick Greek accent, and she is by far from perfect. Some people would question her qualifications. Some people questioned the way she spoke. Some people were insulting towards her publicly. And yet she persevered. And that for me is one of the greatest lessons, because to put yourself out there is hard, but to persevere despite criticism, in my view, is even harder. One of the things that she talks about, her greatest fears, is when she wrote a book about Picasso. And the art world absolutely broke her to bits. They critiqued the work and said that she had no standing and no idea what she was talking about. And she says one of the hardest things is not when you're disliked or criticized by people, but when you're disliked and criticized by people you admire. Now that is really, really tough. And she had to endure that. And again, in awe of this woman. Okay, failure of her 60s. Failure of her 60s, I'm not going to go into, because we've all read Thrive, and if we haven't read it, we should definitely read it. She burnt out, right? And that was one of the biggest failures. But again, what did she do with it? She turned that vulnerability into a book, into lessons for the multitudes, right? And we've all seen her talk, blow-dried, perfect hair, and we're like, oh, it's so easy for her. But hopefully you can see from the catalogue of failures, and I've just written what I perceive to be the biggest ones. There's probably many that she A, hasn't talked about, or B, just has gone through and have been documented elsewhere that I haven't picked up on. But I hope you can see from this catalogue of failures and fears, that no matter how many failures and fears you have, you can still be somebody, as long as you don't let your fears limit you. Okay, so what are the sentiments I love from Arianna Huffington? She gives me the secret. I love anybody who gives me the secret sauce. I'm all for being given the secret sauce. Tell you. Now, this is her secret sauce. She says, my key to overcoming fear is I look for the still center in my life and in myself. A place not susceptible to life's constant ups and downs. It doesn't mean that I don't lose my head and that I wouldn't rather have success and praise rather than failure and criticism. But it does mean that I can always find my way back to that secure structure of inner support, and that all the negative emotions, and especially fears, become opportunities to achieve fearlessness. I just love that, because it's like it's finding that inner part of yourself, that part that is still, that will say, okay, despite what's going on around me, who am I? And how can I come back to that place where everything's going to be okay? I will make it. I will learn something from this. I will be better as a result of whatever I go through. And I will celebrate all that I have and be grateful for all that I am. And that's the part where you find your center, and that anchors you, which also allows you then to go forward and tackle your dreams wholeheartedly. What other key concept do I love? On living the fearless life, here's what Arianna has to say. When we know who we are, we can overcome our fears and insecurities. We surpass our smaller selves who suffer the slings and arrows of our conditioned reality, and we move to the unconditional truth of our larger self. The answers to the questions of what do I say, what do I do, who do I let in, and who do I keep out, become a clear and simple matter of listening to our hearts. That inner voice allows us to align with our purpose. And she says each of us has a purpose, even if we judge it to be insignificant. Now, I hope you don't judge your purpose to be insignificant, but what she keeps coming back to, and how she overcomes her fears of failure and other things, and how she bounces back from failures, is it's inside. You know, she can get affirmations from other people, or she can get, criticized by other people. But it's inside, in that still center, where she's found the solution, the well, if you like, of fearlessness. And I just thought, I need to do this more. Whenever I experience something, I need to stop and still myself. So let me ask you a question. When you last experienced a failure or a setback, how did you still yourself? How did you move on? Did you just ignore it and act like it hadn't happened? Or did you actually say, who am I? And did you reaffirm who you are as a person, your strengths and your vision for yourself? I'll let that one settle in for a minute. And then after sentiments I love, I wanted to talk about the biggest lesson from that I've learned from analyzing this woman and understanding how she's navigated her career. I have learned that once we accept failure and accept it and almost as fuel for our lives and our careers, life is so much easier. I wish I had something more profound than that. Life is so much easier once we accept failure and dance with it and embrace it, right? Which I think is so subtle, but actually so empowering when we put it into action. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about my own career and observations I've experienced from my own career. And I'm taken back to a time when I was experiencing a personal crisis, if you like. And I remember thinking, I wish I could just have some time off, consistent time off, to stop and think about what it is that I want from my life and my career. And I remember speaking to a client who was a CEO, and I said to him, this is what's going on with me, because we were having lunch, and he had asked me. And I said, this is where I am. And he said to me, Michelle, I said, yeah. He said, have you asked your boss for time off? And I said, No, of course I haven't. And he was like, why? I said, well, business reason number 1, business reason number 2, business reason number 3. And I listed all these reasons about why my boss was going to say no. And then he said, that's all in your head, with respect. Just ask. Just ask. And if he says no, then everything you thought was true. And if he says yes, then it wasn't true. And so I felt empowered after that. I was like, oh yeah, I actually haven't asked, because of my fears and because I thought, oh, this is going to fail, and I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to diminish my standing in the organization by making such a frivolous request, right? So I wrote down my points about what I was going to do for my request. I made it clear what was in it for my manager, and I created a compelling case, basically. And once I did that, I went and I asked him, and to my shock and horror, he agreed. I could have a month off. And here was what he expected from me. Here's what I had said I would commit to, and I could go. And I had an incredible time. And in fact, I had said I would have the time off as unpaid, and my boss actually found sneaky ways to make sure that I had extra bonuses, extra, prizes for existing. that I actually didn't have a financial hit either. But what I learned from that was, boy, men are gutsy, because that man just said, just ask. And I hadn't even thought about it. So the moral of the story is, sometimes our fears and our failures actually hinder us from getting what we want, even if it's just something silly like additional time off. I got a month off work and I got paid for it, which was insane. But that's what I observed from my own career. I think sometimes we limit ourselves and actually we don't even try, which is sad. Observation from my career number 2. It all works out in the end. There has been no failures in my career so far. Everything has set me up to get to the next level. And I've learned so much, which is observation number 3 from my career. Lessons have been my greatest ally. Not only has everything worked out, but it's the lessons that I have learned and a commitment to being better off the back of my failures that has allowed me to excel. These lessons have been my absolute greatest ally. And that's one thing I have in common with Arianna. I hope to have much more in common with her as the years go by in terms of the level of success that she has garnered. But for now, I can honestly, hand on heart, say that I am free and not fearless yet, but working on becoming fearless. Once I embrace the fact that I will get things wrong, I will feel fear, but I have to observe what Arianna called her larger self, the bigger picture. And with that, I can drive forward. So just to sum everything up, whenever we feel fearful and are concerned about our failures, let us think, is this the small me or the larger me? And what would the larger me say to the small me? Right? That's the one thing that Arianna said that I loved. But also, what's inside? Cultivate what's inside. Nurture what's inside. Because what's inside will allow you to still the ship, so to speak. And that is what I've learned from Ms. Arianna Huffington. I hope to see you guys in the next episode. But before that, I did say I have an announcement to make. So here at The Influential Me, we decided that we wanted to go on this journey of discovery with you. So I am opening up my book club. Yay! Woo woo! My book club where women come together once a month to read books that transform our lives and our careers. And it's a bit of a community. So you read, if you're not very good at reading and being accountable to yourself, you read more. But also we work together to figure out ways to apply what you read. And third, community. When you feel that sense of accountability and you have people around you reading the same thing, it just makes it all the more fun. So if you want to know more about my book club, send me an email with the words I am in to michelle@theinfluentialme.com. Did you get that? michelle@theinfluentialme.com. And just email me and say, I'm in. And then I'm going to invite you to the webinar that we are hosting on the book club this Sunday. So be sure to check that out. And make sure you email me. I'll be checking my inbox regularly for your emails. I'm really excited about this because I love to read, and I thought, what better way than to read with others as well. And so there you have it. That is all for this week. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week, and I will see you with part 2 of the series on women who failed to let their failures define them. Until then.